Hello again. Good evening. My name is Rinka Stahuljak. I'm professor of comparative literature and French and director of the Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies here at UCLA. And it is on behalf of the center that I extend a warm welcome to so many of you who have entered the virtual room for this year's edition of the Armand Hammer Art History Lecture. The annual Armand Hammer Art History Lecture is supported by a discretionary endowment provided for CMRS by the late Armand Hammer, an oil magnate who was an admirer of art, especially the work of Leonardo da Vinci. We owe to him the UCLA Hammer Museum. Although the endowment that Hammer established for CMRS does not require an annual lecture, the series began in 1999 under the directorship of Andy Kelly as a way to honor this gift. Speakers for the series are recommended to the CMRS director by the center's art history faculty members, and I'm very proud to say that UCLA now has 7 faculty members working in art history under the temporal purview of CMRS. Established in 1963, CMRS promotes and sustains transdisciplinary studies of the period from late antiquity to the early modern era, and since 2019, it includes the spatial coverage of the globe beyond the traditional understanding of European late antiquity, Middle Ages, and Renaissance, formally making connections that are true to the time period, from Africa to the Pacific Rim to East and Southeast Asia. This year, much of our focus was on the Americas and effects of colonization, explored in a series of podcasts and events, among them a conference entitled 1521, Making the World While Breaking the World, that was considering the Pacific Rim. Professor Elizabeth Boone's lecture felicitously continues this trajectory, even though it wasn't so planned at the very outset, since the lecture was postponed from last spring due to the coronavirus pandemic. And I'm very thankful to Professor Boone for working with CMRS to reschedule it. This is an occasion for me and CMRS to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. As a land-grant institution, we pay our respects to the Honukwetam, Ahihiram, and Eyohinkem, past, present, and emerging. Professor Boone's invitation is important for CMRS at the present time, not merely because it coincides with CMRS's acknowledgement of its physical location in indigenous lands and a thematic orientation. It is also important because of its methodological import. Introducing alternate literacies that did not transcribe speech, but still use graphic forms, writing without words, and painting knowledge, is a way of doing global history from a decentered, non-European perspective, as CMRS aims to do while continuing to support its traditional areas of study. I will momentarily turn the virtual podium over to Professor Charlene Villaseñor-Black, who will introduce our speaker. Charlene Villaseñor-Black is Professor of Art History and Chicana Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, and Associate Director of the Chicano Studies Research Center. Professor Villaseñor-Black is author of a number of monographs, edited and co-edited volumes, and faculty advisor or curator on several exhibitions. This includes the Getty Museum grant for a Pacific Standard Time in 2024, for which she proposed Verdant Worlds, Art and Sustainability Across the Cosmos with the sponsorship of CMRS. Most recently, she is PI of Critical Mission Studies at California's Crossroads, $1 million grant, and a recipient of the 2021-2022 Terra Foundation Visiting Professorship of American Art at Oxford University. Charlene, I turn it over to you. Thank you again, everyone. Welcome.
Thank you. It's my great honor to introduce this year's distinguished speaker for UCLA CMRS's annual Hammer Art History Lecture, Dr. Elizabeth Boone, the Martha and Donald Robertson Chair in Latin American Art at Tulane University, where she has taught since 1995. A specialist in the pre-Columbian and early colonial art of Latin America, with an emphasis on Mexico, she earned her PhD at the University of Texas at Austin in 1977. Her honors are numerous. She is formerly Director of Pre-Columbian Studies at Dumbarton Oaks from 1980 to 95. From 2006 to 2008, she was the Andrew W. Mellon Professor at the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art. She is a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a corresponding member of the Academia Mexicana de la Historia. She has been awarded Mexico's Order of the Aztec Eagle, and that was in 1990. As well as a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Society for Ethnohistory in 2019. And also in 2019, she was recognized by the College Art Association as Distinguished Scholar. And this was a really proud moment for me as the conference chair that year. Her research is grounded geographically in Aztec Mexico, but extends temporally for at least a century after the Spanish invasion. Her interests range from the history of collecting to systems of writing and notation. Her edited books include The Aztec Templo Mayor, 1987, Writing Without Words, 1994, with Walter Mignolo, Native Traditions in the Post-Conquest World, 1998, with Tom Cummins, and Their Way of Writing, Scripts, Signs, and Pictographies in Pre-Columbian America, 2011, with Gary Urton. Among her single-authored books are The Codex Malayabecquiano and the Lost Prototype of the Malayabecquiano Group, 1983, The Aztec World, 1994, Stories in Red and Black, Pictorial Histories of the Aztecs and Mixtecs, 2000, Cycles of Time and Meaning in the Mexican Books of Fate, 2007, and most recently, 2021, Descendants of Aztec Pictography, the Cultural Encyclopedias of 16th-century Mexico. As these titles make clear, her work focuses particularly on the way knowledge is recorded graphically, how, for example, stories about the past can be told pictorially, how religious and mantic or divinatory concepts can be expressed solely through images, and how images retained their documentary authority after the Spanish conquest. She is interested also in understanding the circumstances in which visual thinking and pictorial expression proved to be more effective than logosyllabic scripts. So please join me in welcoming her today for her talk, Spatial Grammars, the Union of Art and Writing in the Painted Books of Aztec Mexico.
I'm delighted to be here finally. Thank you, Zrinka Stajulik, for having me. And it's great to be here. And I realize that because of Zoom, we can reach a larger audience than we might ordinarily reach, at least a more diverse audience all across the country. So that gives me great pleasure. So let me begin. Are we up? Good. My work focuses on the painted books of Aztec Mexico, documents that some people consider to be works of art and other people consider to contain writing. My work thus explores that place where art and writing come closest together. I like to think that it agitates and irritates that space between the domains commonly known as art and as writing, and makes uneasy our conception of both. The Aztecs of Mexico had both images and script. They painted on walls, carved in stone, and wrote in books. Their books, called codices today by Mesoamerican specialists, usually took the physical form of long strips of bark paper or deer hide that were folded accordion style into pages or screen folds. Others were manifest as hide or paper panels or great cotton sheets. Not only did the Aztecs recognize their wall painting and stone carving as artistry, they described their books as artistry also. And the finest painted books are dazzling displays of the painter's art. But the purpose of these books was to contain what we would call writing, to carry the signs that recorded their past, foretold their future, preserved the tenets of their ideology, and documented many of the mundane aspects of life. For the Aztecs and their neighbors, these painted books fully occupied the cultural category of writing. Today, however, they are studied by art historians and anthropologists, but rarely by historians, with the welcome exception of Kevin Terraziano, who I hope is among us, and a few others, enlightened souls. This is because the Aztecs and their neighbors did not write alphabetically in words and sentences. They did not even write phonetically in hieroglyphs, as did the Maya. Their script was pictorial rather than language-based, deploying images and figures in complex spatial structures. The script's iconic and spatial qualities, however, keep it from being fully embraced within Western notions of writing. And its conventional and notational aspects pull it away from being art. We, as sentient beings of the 21st century West, learned early to separate art from writing as distinct but related cultural categories. This distinction, rather than being inherent in humankind, is a cultural artifact of the West. Specialists in childhood development in Europe and the United States have found that drawing and writing develop out of the more general graphic activity of very young children, whose scribbles and marks include both the iconic as well as the abstract and symbolic. Schooling soon nurtures and trains abstract mark making into alphabetic writing, which is conceptualized as the most advanced form of written communication. At the same time, it urges the iconic marks into image making and art production. The result is that pictures are painted and books are written, having developed within different domains, although often these two distinct graphic registers come together within the same volume. We thus approach art with certain expectations and the set of skills and theories of the art historian and critic, including formal analysis, iconography, stylistic analysis, materiality, and a range of other perspectives, including those social and cultural. We approach writing with other expectations and several very different sets of skills and approaches, including linguistics, epigraphy, paleography, and literary theory. Although art and writing often appear together, it is usually the very juxtaposition of image and text that is of interest. Written manuscripts are illuminated. Paintings and drawings are captioned or have embedded texts. But the Aztecs and their neighbors did not distinguish between art and writing to the extent that we do. Among the Aztecs, the activities of painting, drawing, and writing share the same verb, tlacuilolisli. The term tlacuilo embraces both the painter and the scribe, whose domains are the brush and the ink pots. So we who study the painted books and carved monuments of ancient Mexico have to fight against the knowledge arrangements of the West that put art and writing in separate categories. We must not try to compress the figural and pictorial to fit within the concepts, to fit within the confines of the Western notion of art. And we must move beyond the debate over whether the hieroglyphic, pictographic, and symbolic images are or are not real writing. Instead, we need to acknowledge and treat the cultural category of Mesoamerican art/writing as a single system of knowledge production and circulation. Mexican pictography is a nonverbal system of graphic communication, where the images carry meaning directly within the structure of their own discourse, but without a detour through speech. One does not have to convert the marks into specific words. One does not have to speak them even in one's mind in order to understand them. Other such systems that are beyond language are alphabetic and music notation, international codes of public signage, chemical diagramming, and statistical graphics. All of these can be understood and digested without language, and therefore they can be read by speakers of Mandarin, Yoruba, and Russian, as long as these readers are literate in these graphic systems. In each of these systems, the images and marks provide the vocabulary, and the spatial arrangement of the images provides the grammatical structure, or what one would call the syntax. For Mexican pictography, it is important to understand both the pictorial vocabulary and the governing syntax. So in the rest of this talk, I want first to focus on the graphic vocabulary, and then later to explore the syntax or the spatial grammar. Like all other writing systems, Mexican pictography is composed of flat conventional marks that are arranged on a specially prepared discrete surface according to specific conventions. These special surfaces can be of stone, ceramic, or wood, but they are often the flat planes of portable books. Meaning is conveyed both by the marks themselves and by their placement relative to each other on the plane. The marks are figural and are representational to the extent that they usually bear some resemblance or overt visual reference to what they signify. But they are not illusionistically realistic in describing optically perceived form. Like alphabetically written words, they are graphic expressions of entities, qualities, events, times, locations, and sometimes sounds. Most pictographic signs are based on human and animal forms, sometimes fused or with interchangeable parts, and represented in a manner that displays the most characteristic features of the form and allows it to hold the most information. They are ideoplastic in the sense that the image accords with the idea of the original form rather than its optical appearance. An ideoplastic image is a stable and inert rendering of form that is understood and known rather than seen. Such is the conventionally posed figure of the water goddess Chalchihuitlicue, whose name means jade her skirt, here in a divinatory manual called the Codex Borbonicus. The figure's legs, arms, and head are simply attached to a profile torso without any effort to render the joints and junctures anatomically. The fingers of her hands and the toes of the feet are not distinguished left from right. She looks like she has two left hands. All her ornaments are also rotated so as best to represent their components and characteristics. For example, her blue nose ornament is presented frontally to us, although it hangs beneath a profile nose. Her breastplate of gold discs and blue and green stones also faces us, although her body is in profile. The complex image is also accretive and agglutinative in that it is composed of multiple visual elements that are simply added to a core. Chalchihuitlicue's human form is an armature on which are layered her many physical attributes and accoutrements. Agglutination is a principal characteristic of the grammar of Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. Nahuatl relies on nominal and verbal words constructed into sentence words by the addition of multiple affixes to a stem. One sees in pictography this same packing on of separate meaningful elements to build a message. And we should recognize that many complex pictographic images, such as this water goddess, likely function as figural sentences or even whole discourses. The relationship between these marks and what they signify belongs to the treacherous realm of iconography. Pictography has a sliding scale of indexicality, extending from the relatively straightforward picture on one hand to the graphic articulation of nearly unfathomable metaphoric meaning on the other end. Within this scale, one encounters representational abstractions of various sorts, symbols that are linked to their reference only by convention, various levels of synecdoche and metonymy, and of course, metaphors of many levels. For example, the headdress of unspun cotton in the upper right corner of Chalchihuitlicue's panel signifies the presence and forces of Tlazotetl, goddess of childbirth and patroness of weavers. To the right of Chalchihuitlicue are pictured ceramic vessels containing blood letters, human hearts, and particular herbs, all qualified as especially precious by the addition of a conventionally rendered flower. They signify the kinds of offerings required to activate particular forces of fate. By convention and illusion, pictography easily conveys a great range of data and thought, including entities, qualities, and states of being, places, abstract concepts, actions and events, temporalities, appellatives, and the sounds of language. Each of the major literary genres, the history, the divinatory almanac, and the protocol for ritual, has its own pictorial conventions. An example is the Codex Mendoza, a manuscript painted shortly after the conquest, perhaps to inform Charles V how large the perhaps to inform Charles V how large the Aztec Empire was. It contains an Aztec victory chronicle, which on this page features the reign of King Ahuitzotl, whose name means water beast. Along the left side of the page, the year signs that identify the years of his reign run sequentially in conjoined rectangular frames from top to bottom. They read from 8 reed through 10 rabbit, each sign composed of a number of discs and of one of 4 signs. Center left is the symbol of the ruler Ahuitzotl. His status and occupation as ruler are conveyed by his seated posture on a yellow reed mat, by the pointed turquoise diadem on his head, and by the small blue speech scroll to the right of his mouth. The speech scroll does not mean he's here voicing something. It signifies his title of Tlatoani, or speaker. We identify this individual as Ahuitzotl because of the name sign attached to his head, a rodent-like beast with the convention for water running along its back and tail. In the center of the page, a conventional symbol for war, a shield backed by horizontal spears and a vertical spear thrower, marks the presentation as a message of victory. All around are the defeated polities, identified by their place signs and by burning temples with their roofs askew. And here in the detail, we have the polity of turquoise serpent. Not all these towns had their temples burned, however. The burning temple is simply one of the conventions for conquest and defeat. The spatial syntax of this presentation is largely diagrammatic. The strip of year signs, the ruler, and the symbol for war are fixed in their respective locations. They appear this way for all the rulers' reigns, with the conquest displayed in rows. The space or plane of the page thus carries associative powers, for it effectively creates a set by linking similar syntactically equivalent items, these being the conquered polities, to the ruler and his reign. This plane is also qualified temporally, for it is fixed in time by the 16-year period marked by the blue year signs. A similarly diagrammatic and temporally bounded presentation is the page in a book of fate that features the goddess Chalchihuitlicue, whom we saw before. Together on this page is information on the fates for those born in this week. We have Chalchihuitlicue and the various symbols that govern the whole week, and to the right and below, the individual days and their own individual patrons. The page brings together and unites the graphic elements that make up that prognostication. Within the main panel that holds Chalchihuitlicue, the elements arrayed around her are conceptualized as carrying equal weight, just as are the conquest of Ahuitzotl in the Codex Mendoza. Another genre of pictographic record, which effectively interweaves time, space, and event, but exploits a linear rather than a diagram. Let me back up. Another genre of pictographic record, which efficiently interweaves time, place, and event, but exploits a linear rather than a diagrammatic structure, is the narrative history of the Mixtec screenfold books. Have I lost you? Okay. Something has happened with, can you see my screen?
Yes, but it's
Can-
not quite what you intend.
I know. When did this appear?
Just now.
Should I delete this?
Don't know.
Let me try. Where are we? Oh, there we are. We're back. Good.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is crazy. Anyway, an example is the Codex Selden, a section of which features events during the reign of Lady Monkey of a town called Anute. This pictorial record organizes its content as a linear stream of events that flow along registers. These particular registers track back and forth in a pattern from the bottom to the top of each page. The flow of the story is composed of a series of events, usually ordered sequentially in time. The events of Lady Six Monkey's story begin in the right of the bottom register with a statement of her birth. This is conventionally signified by a seated adult woman with a red umbilical cord joining her rump to a round yellow placenta. She, as are all the protagonists in the Mixtec pictorial histories, is identified by her birthday calendrical name. In her case, it is the day Six Monkey, 6 discs, and the head, which is the head of a monkey, which is the day sign monkey. These attached to her head by a line. She wears as a poncho her personal name, which is Serpent Keshkemetl. This birth statement of Lady Six Monkey, Serpent Keshkemetl, then participates in a subsequent event, which is her consultation with an aged male named Tin Lizard. The space around Six Monkey's image functions in 2 ways. It first serves simply to define her birth statement. Then the space to her right converts to experiential space that joins her with Tin Lizard in a meeting that had to have taken place at a single, but here unspecified location and time. In the second register above, attention shifts to her father, Lord Tin Eagle, personal name Jaguar, who successfully defends Anute from the attack by Lord Three Lizard, Hair of Jade, whose invasion is marked by the road with footprints under his feet. Both warriors hold round shields and stone-faced swords, but Tin Eagle grabs the submissive Three Lizard by the hair in a gesture of conquest. Behind Tin Eagle, the town of Anute, which means place of sand, is glyphically signified by a hill sign that is qualified by a human mouth with a curl of sand emitting from it. The mouth is a phonetic complement carrying the sound ah, which means place of. A band of clouds across the top of the hill sign characterizes Anute as a highland town among the clouds. The precise date of this battle is given to the right. The day for wind, you see the mouth mask of the wind god. In the year for house, the year marked by the AO sign that signifies year. Although Six Monkey's birth is noted succinctly, her father's defense of Anute is stated in greater detail, with the particulars of place, date, and attacker included, and it occupies most of a register. Space is elastic in these narrative histories and varies according to the amount of detail being recorded. Other events in the Six Monkey story follow in this manner. All the participants are identified by their calendrical and personal names, and the events are clearly articulated by means of well-known conventions. Place signs locate the events, while specific dates provide temporal control when needed. The Mixtec narrative history, with its sequential action, range of diverse events, secure dating, and multiple personae, approximates in narrative richness and structure the histories we know from the Western European tradition. Although its vocabulary is highly figural and its syntax is spatial, It is a graphic form that aligns most clearly with Western writing and that aligns more clearly with Western writing than with Western pictorial representation. Whether organized diagrammatically or linearly, pictographic texts are founded on the figural image and the meaning it conventionally carries within a specific genre, and also the meaning it carries according to its organizational structure, its spatial field, and the cohort of images with which it's surrounded. The sounds of spoken language are consciously cued in appellatives, these being glyphs for personal names and places, where they function as phonetic indicators and complements to help identify the correct word. For example, in the Codex Selden, the image of a human mouth is used to signify the ah in Anute. Pictography is a writing system beautifully designed to record concepts and data of a non-linguistic nature, a system particularly well adapted to functioning across languages in the multilingual world of late post-classic Central and Southern Mexico, AD 1300 to about 1521. Now that we have a sense of how images provide the graphic vocabulary of these systems, let's look at the structure or syntax of these systems. This is contained in the flat surface that supports the image. It is an active force that charges the marks with distinct meanings and thereby shapes the message. This field at first glance appears to be empty or neutral, just as we think of the physical page of a book to be neutral. Probably in no case, however, is this truly so. Rather, the field of pictography is pregnant with meaning that the forms and marks on the page elicit. This two-dimensional field functions in 6 fundamental ways. 5 of these functions are relational, in that they relate images internally to one another, despite their placement on the page. But the 6th function assigns fixed qualities to different parts of the page, so that any images located in these areas take on those qualities. This may sound a bit confusing, but I hope it will become clearer later. Firstly, the two-dimensional field defines and separates individual elements as distinct items. Adhesion complements this defining and separating function by drawing images together within the same unit of meaning. Usually a secondary image is tied to a primary one. Association comes when a more relaxed relational pull associates syntactically equivalent items as in a set. Participation comes when the spatial field bonds 2 or more figures together as participants in a common activity or instance. It carves out for them an experiential reality distinct from what otherwise surrounds them. Sequence comes when serial forces are added, so that space establishes the priority of one image before the other. These are all topological or relational qualities, and they account for much of the spatial meaning in the Mexican system. However, when the two-dimensional field is charged with fixed temporal and geographic specificity, it organizes marks into expressions that are located concretely according to time and place. You're not seeing my title at the top. It says definition and separation. The essential function of the two-dimensional field is to surround an image and thus allow it to exist by virtue of its distinction from the ground. So King Huitzotl is distinguished as an entity that exists in the space around him. This space also separates him from the yellow and blue shield to his right. This same function, to define and separate, occurs even in alphabetic writing, for individual written words are created by separating them in space. So at the top of the screen, we recognize the words definition and separation as distinct units. In the early Middle Ages, however, written words were not separated by space. So one had to read them out to get the sense. But when space was added between the words to separate them, it allowed readers to see the words as visual units that could easily be read. It has been proposed that this led to the kind of sight reading we do today. The space between the words defines and separates them and allows them to be seen as units. Adhesion. The field that is otherwise neutral is infused with adhesive force when a primary image is modified by an accompanied subordinate attribute. Such is the charged nature of the space that links human actors to their name signs. Although King Ahuitzotl on the left has his name sign attached to him with a line, in many codices, the name signs float more freely. On the right, for example, another great conqueror is represented initiating a series of conquests. His birthday name is 8 Deer, represented by the white deer head and 8 red discs at the top. His personal name is Jaguar or Jaguar Claw, signified by the jaguar claw in the upper right. The character of these glyphic signs as subordinate elements means that the space between them and the humans they identify must be read as a bonding force. The space between the conqueror and his name sign is space that belongs to him only. We also see this adhesive force at work when date glyphs give temporal specificity to events. An example is the birth of the culture hero, Lord Nine Wind, in a pre-conquest Mexican cosmogony, the Codex Vienna, where an umbilical cord links him to the great anthropomorphic knife from which he was born. The multicolored flint knife is just above him. He, like Lord Eight Deer and Lady Six Monkey, is named for his birthday, in this case, the day Nine Wind. This day appears just below him. We see 2 strings of 5 and 4 discs and the red trumpet-like mask of the wind god. So this is both his name and also the date of this event of his birth. Just to the right is the year of his birth, Tin House, represented by a little house within an A-frame, and the 10 discs below it. Since these 2 dates qualify the event, locating it in time, the space between them and the event is no longer neutral. What would otherwise be neutral default space now must be read as active and as having connected properties. The defining field surrounding a primary image, then, must be flexible enough to encompass calendrical and personal names for humans and dates for events. Association. Looser spatial forces come into play when items having the same syntactic character and semantic weight are presented as a set. Such items usually belong to the same category of entity, for the function of the set structure is to present them individually, implicitly to compare them with each other, and finally to demonstrate their shared participation in the meaning of the aggregate. Each item in a set is thus influenced by its joint membership with the others. Such is the record of tribute that the province of Choconosco in distant Guatemala sent to the Aztec capital in the Codex Mendoza. The place signs of the towns in the province are listed as a vertical set along the left side of the page, and the goods and quantities are itemized to their right. Quantities are indicated by the small white banners that indicate 20, and the tree-like signs that indicate 400. So Choconosco sent 2 jade necklaces, then in the next row, 400 plus 400 or 800 bunches of blue, red, and green feathers. Then in the third row, 400 plus 400 bunches of yellow and long green quetzal feathers, as well as the pelts of blue cotinga birds, 20 times 4 plus 20 times 4, or 160 of these bird pelts, and 2 gold lip ornaments. Below this are bales of cacao beans, chocolate, 2 times 5 plus 2 times 5 or 200, and 20 plus 20 jaguar pelts. Also 400 plus 400 gourds for drinking chocolate, and 2 bricks of liquid amber. In arrangements like this, the figures are evenly positioned in an overall pattern, so the space around them links them as elements in a set, but does not specify their physical location relative to each other. The feathers are not physically above the jaguar skins, for example, and they're not earlier or later than them either. Within such assemblages, it can also occur that some images are more closely linked to each other than to others around them, so subsets occur. The presentation of the 16 personified qualities of Lord Nine Wind, which appears directly after Nine Wind's birth, is a good example. Within the confines of the framing guidelines, 16 males are variously posed, colored, dressed, and accessorized. Their directionality follows the fundamental back and forth reading order of this manuscript, which reads up and down the page between the guidelines, beginning in the lower right, and then back and forth within the columns. Each male figure is an autonomous expression of one aspect and title of Lord Nine Wind. They are arranged equidistant, or as close to equidistant as can easily be accomplished, in order to achieve a stable and balanced statement that expresses this set of qualities. Similarities of pose and costume, however, link the qualities internally, generally 2 by 2 as couplets, but also in groups of 4. The 4 figures in the lower right, for example, share the same seated pose and are differentiated by color and costuming, and are differentiated only by color and costuming. So we see a white male with a headband of unspun cotton, a blue male with a headdress of rich jewels, a yellow male with a headdress of golden bells, and a bearded male with the essential face paint and costume of Nine Wind in his aspect as the god Quetzalcoatl. As a quartet, one might voice these qualities or titles as Lord of White Cotton, Lord of Jade, Lord of Gold, Lord Quetzalcoatl. Although the next 4 are less clearly couplets and elude facile characterization, the remaining 8 figures in the left column cluster in 2s according to their visual and expository properties. One might voice these qualities from top to bottom as the conqueror, the warrior, the stone man, the precious singer, he who has song in his heart, he who paints manuscripts, he of the earth bundle, he of the sheep god bundle. Couplets, rephrasings, and syntactic and semantic parallelisms like this are common features of Mesoamerican song, poetry, and expression. Their grouping here is not unlike that of some poetry written alphabetically. Participation. Although the two-dimensional field in simple sets characterizes the constituent elements as belonging together with implications of parity, it does so in a fairly neutral way. It simply associates them. But we see a much more forceful and specific kind of spatial field when figures participate together in a common activity or shared experience. Then the field between and around them binds them together in a dramaturgical or experiential space. This kind of space, and again, we see it in the Codex Vienna, embraces Lord Two Dog and 2 males, one with a large bird's beak with whom he interacts. The event takes place in the year 9 Rabbit, day 4 Wind. The location, Apawala, is signified by the place sign at the bottom. This group of figures represents one event, and the space between the males is tense with their physical closeness. On the same page, a more extended experiential space joins 14 supernaturals in a ceremony involving frothy beer made from the maguey plant, which the supernaturals hold up in bowls. The binding space here extends from the maguey field on the right, where the ceremony is presumably located, across the break in the register to embrace the 12 seated supernaturals on the left. This event, like the one before it, has its own internal space that joins the figures in that one event, but not in the other. There is a cognitive break between Lord Two Dogs' meeting in the bottom right and the Feast of Megabeer that follows. What we have here is a sequence of events, and sequence is a fourth kind of spatial signification. The sense of time being expressed here is neither physical nor measurable. Rather, we can think of it as phenomenal because it depends on the duration of the actions performed by the participants. This is to say that the 8 inches of size deer hide between the upper and lower edges of the pages are not dividable into equal discrete links that carry temporal meaning. Rather, each scene has its own temporal duration that lasts as long as the activity being depicted. The field or ground uniting the figures in each event is filled with a temporality that endures only as long as the event. The sequential presentation of events is the principal mode of recording history in the codices of southern Mexico, which are close to our understanding of narrative history. Another example of a sequence is a series of 24 conquests made by the ruler Lord Eight Deer. Lord Eight Deer appears as the conqueror only when the sequence begins, and all the conquests are signified conventionally by place signs, which are the names of the towns, with an arrow driven deep into the top of the sign. We are not told here how long each battle took, but the day dates painted before each place sign tell us the dates of these victories. They came at irregular intervals. The first 3 conquests took place 55, 14, and 126 days apart. The regular even placement of the conquered towns on this page masks this temporal variability and brings a sense of regularity and inevitability to the sequence of victories. For the author is focusing less on the passage of specific time than on the sequence of places conquered. These spatial functions of adhesion, association, experience, and sequence are all topological. They define special areas of the otherwise neutral default space that have their own inner cohesion and governing principles. And they can expand or contract according to their own spatial needs, vis-a-vis the spatial needs of other areas around them. Much of Mexican pictography features these kinds of elastic space. There are, however, pictographic genres whose 2-dimensional field is charged with more permanent temporal and geographic specificity. Consequently, the marks that occupy these surfaces have value according to where they are located on the surface. Maps, for example, employ a fixed geographic field so that the location of a place on the surface of the map tells you where that place is actually located. And here, without going into detail, is a section of an Aztec history, the Mapa Cuautinchan #2, which shows individuals engaged in activities at very specific places, located on the map in a rough geographic display. The Mexican pictorial histories use fixed fields like this for both cartographic histories and annals histories. The annals history, which is shown here in the Tierra de Tepechpan, for example, orders time in regular increments according to a sequence of the year signs. Here, the year signs in round blue cartouches run left to right, creating a horizontal ribbon of time. Events are located according to the year in which they occurred, painted in a vertical column of temporality that extends above and below each year sign. In the year 1 read, which was 1519, the annalists recorded the arrival of the Spanish invaders to Mexico. Above the year sign, the dove and cross mark the coming of Christianity. And below the year sign, the striding warrior is Hernando Cortez, who landed in Mexico that year. The following year, another column of temporality indicates above the year sign that smallpox arrives, and below the year sign that the main temple of the Aztecs was burned, and 2 successive Aztec rulers died. These events can only be located where they are, in line with their year dates, and they take meaning from this location. This kind of measurable space is the foundation for maps, charts, and graphs of various kinds, where the specific placement of an item on the field carries significant data. It matters where marked is specifically located. So to summarize, all these graphic expressions that conventionally record specific information rely on marks put on a 2-dimensional ground. It is important to analyze and understand the marks because they are the units of data. They compose the graphic vocabulary of the presentation. But it is the 2-dimensional ground that contains the forces that enable and qualify these marks, that tell you what kinds of marks they are and how they relate to one another. This ground separates and distinguishes the images, but it can also pull them together into various kinds of associations. The spatial ground can unite them as members in a set, as participants in an event, and as elements in a sequence. This ground in maps and annals can also assign them values according to precise location. Far from being neutral, the 2-dimensional field of pictography is potent with signifying arenas. It works in tandem with the figural images as a spatial grammar that structures the message being conveyed. And I thank you for your attention.